Welcome to a space where truth is not performed but lived, where knowledge is not mistaken for transformation, and where the deepest work begins beneath the surface of what others can see. This message is not designed to comfort the image you have built, but to confront the parts of you that have learned how to appear aligned while remaining internally unchanged. There is a form of spiritual identity that looks correct, sounds correct, and behaves correctly, yet quietly replaces intimacy with performance. It is subtle, convincing, and often rewarded. This is what we are calling the cognitive Pharisee, not as an external figure to criticize, but as an internal pattern to recognize and dismantle. There is a warning that has echoed through Scripture that remains deeply relevant. In Matthew 23, Yeshua speaks directly against those who honor truth outwardly while remaining disconnected inwardly, saying that they clean the outside of the cup while the inside remains unclean. This is not simply a critique of behavior, but a revelation of misalignment. It is possible to appear disciplined, knowledgeable, and committed, while the internal state remains guarded, hardened, and resistant to transformation. The cognitive Pharisee is built on this misalignment. It is the part of the mind that substitutes understanding for surrender, that uses knowledge as a shield rather than a tool for growth. It learns the language of faith, the structure of doctrine, and the patterns of religious behavior, but avoids the vulnerability required for real change. It thrives in environments where being right is valued more than being real, where clarity of argument is prioritized over depth of connection. In the modern landscape, especially in an age shaped by constant digital interaction, this pattern becomes amplified. Conversations about truth often become debates, and debates become performances. The goal subtly shifts from understanding to winning, from connection to correction. Each moment of being right provides a sense of reinforcement, a psychological reward that strengthens the identity. Over time, this creates a cycle where the pursuit of truth is replaced by the pursuit of validation through correctness. Scripture speaks directly to this dynamic. In 1 Corinthians 8:1, it is written that knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. This distinction is critical. Knowledge alone can inflate the sense of self, creating distance rather than connection. Love, on the other hand, requires openness, humility, and the willingness to engage beyond surface-level understanding. When knowledge is not balanced with humility, it becomes a barrier rather than a bridge. Beneath this pattern is often a deeper psychological mechanism. The drive to appear spiritually strong, consistent, or knowledgeable is frequently rooted in a fear of being exposed. Vulnerability carries risk. It requires admitting uncertainty, acknowledging struggle, and allowing others to see what is not yet resolved. For many, it feels safer to construct an identity that appears stable than to reveal what feels unstable. The cognitive Pharisee uses correctness to avoid this exposure. It creates an internal checklist, a set of standards by which both self and others are measured. This checklist becomes a distraction, shifting attention away from internal work and toward external evaluation. This is not a new pattern. In Luke 18:9-14, the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector illustrates this contrast clearly. One stands confidently, listing his righteousness, while the other stands in humility, aware of his need. The outcome is not determined by outward behavior alone, but by the posture of the heart. The one who acknowledges his need leaves justified, while the one who relies on his own perceived correctness does not. This reveals that transformation is not rooted in performance, but in honesty. Maintaining a constructed spiritual identity is exhausting. It requires constant consistency, constant awareness of how one is perceived, and constant reinforcement of the image. Over time, the gap between the public self and the private reality becomes difficult to sustain. This is often where fatigue sets in, not because faith itself is burdensome, but because the version of it being maintained is not authentic. The weight comes from pretending, from holding together something that does not fully align with what is actually happening internally. There comes a moment where knowledge alone is no longer enough, where understanding concepts of grace, forgiveness, and transformation does not translate into experiencing them. This is where the shift must occur. Not by acquiring more information, but by allowing what is already known to move beyond the mind and into lived reality. This requires the removal of the shield of correctness. It requires asking difficult questions, not about others, but about oneself. Where am I using knowledge to avoid change? Where am I maintaining an image instead of pursuing alignment? Holiness, when understood correctly, is not the absence of struggle. It is the willingness to remain open within the struggle. It is not about presenting a flawless exterior, but about allowing truth to reach areas that are still in process. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, it is written that strength is made perfect in weakness. This does not glorify weakness itself, but reveals that transformation occurs when weakness is acknowledged rather than hidden. It is in that acknowledgement that grace becomes active. There is a growing shift toward recognizing the value of authenticity in community. The model of the untouchable, perfect spiritual figure is being replaced by a more grounded understanding of shared growth. This does not remove the importance of leadership or guidance, but it reframes it. Leadership is no longer about appearing flawless, but about being aligned and transparent in the process. This creates space for others to engage honestly, rather than feeling the need to match an unrealistic standard. Practicing this kind of openness requires intention. It does not mean sharing everything with everyone, but it does mean creating spaces where honesty is possible. This could be with trusted individuals, within small communities, or in moments of reflection where self-awareness is allowed to surface without immediate judgment. The goal is not exposure for attention, but exposure for alignment, to bring what is hidden into a place where it can be understood and transformed. At the same time, boundaries remain important. Vulnerability without discernment can lead to imbalance. The aim is not to abandon wisdom, but to integrate honesty with stability, to be open without being ungrounded, to be transparent without losing structure. This balance allows vulnerability to become a strength rather than a liability. As this process develops, identity begins to shift. It is no longer built on being correct, but on being aligned. There is less need to prove, less need to defend, and less need to maintain an image. Instead, there is a growing sense of stability that comes from knowing that what is presented externally matches what is being worked on internally. This reduces the tension that comes from living in two different states. Peace begins to replace pressure. Not because everything is resolved, but because there is no longer a need to hide what is unresolved. This creates a different kind of confidence, one that is not based on perfection, but on honesty. It allows growth to continue without the constant interruption of maintaining appearances. This is the call of the worldwide truth ecumenical movement, to move beyond surface-level expressions of faith and into something that is internally consistent, grounded, and real. To recognize that truth is not demonstrated through performance, but through alignment. To understand that knowledge, while valuable, must be accompanied by humility and openness in order to produce transformation. If you recognize the presence of the cognitive Pharisee within your own patterns, understand that awareness is the first step. This is not about condemnation, but about correction. It is an opportunity to shift from maintaining an image to pursuing alignment, to move from knowing about truth to being shaped by it. Thank you for standing with the worldwide truth ecumenical movement. Remain committed to truth not only in what you understand, but in how you live. Allow knowledge to lead to humility, and let humility create space for real transformation. Because it is not the appearance of righteousness that restores, but the willingness to be seen, known, and aligned with what is real.